Are you wondering how you can learn more about food? Well, you're in the right place. This is the Chakula Podcast, brought to you by the Root to Food Initiative, a show that celebrates authentic Kenyan dishes and serves you hot conversations about food in Kenya from an economic, social, and political lens. Sema nasi kwenye social media at Root to Food on Instagram, at Root to Food on Twitter, and Root to Food on Facebook. And now, here's your host, Felistas Mwalia.
Hello and welcome to the Chakula Podcast. Today we'll be talking to Mr. Nic Odhiambo, who happens to be an organic farmer, a great writer, and a chef all in one. If you follow the last episode, you might agree with me that chefs have a unique role to play in our food systems and shaping the way we think about food and understand food. Karibu sana, Nic.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Nic is an exclusive chef with a major focus on using food as a powerful tool to solve some humanity's biggest problems. And Nic believes that food has the same power to heal us as it does to make us sick, and he advocates for sustainable food systems, given that agricultural production is the number one cause of climate change, and the current food systems are the major contributor to malnutrition, diet-related health issues, and the acceleration of the loss of cultural and ecological diversity. He uses his cooking, farming, and writing to advocate for sustainable food systems. Welcome again, Nic. What a profile.
I'm happy to be here. I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Perhaps you can start us off by telling us what your relationship with food is and why do you consider this relationship important?
First of all, I think in order for me to talk comprehensively about my relationship with food, I have to take us back to my childhood. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Limuru, and in Limuru at the time, that would have been now the first interaction I really had with food, given that I was brought up in a farmhouse. My father could grow all kinds of horticultural products in a small garden. We had spinach, kales, onions, tomatoes. And we had a few fruit trees in the shamba as well. At the same time, on one part of the farm, there was a chicken pen, so that now whenever the chicken pen was cleaned, all that manure would be spread evenly, throughout the farm, right? So, when I think about my first relationship with food, it really reminds me of my father and the way he believed that the only way that we can live, the only way we can live healthy lives, the only way we can work hard, the only way we can have energy to do anything we want to do is if we are first of all well fed. Because if we are hungry, literally it's like a logical thing. For instance, you can't expect a vehicle to move if there's no gas in it, or there's no diesel or petrol or whatever. So how can we be expected as humans to function properly without enough food? And not just food in the sense of you wake up and you have a cup of tea and bread, but like wholesome food, nutritious, nutrient-dense foods. So when I think about just the whole aspect of food, first of all, I think about my dad and the way he instilled in us the need to, either grow our own food or just eat as naturally as possible. I remember as well that his cooking style was very simple. He didn't like a lot of complication. He didn't like a lot of complication in his, the way he cooked. Yeah, he could make very simple meals. Yeah, so that now food is not just like an item to fill our stomachs. Yeah, but food is a whole, a whole system. Food provides a whole range of nutrition, provides strength to our bodies. And given the way we produce it, it reflects on our environment, it reflects on our relationship with with others. Like when you think about food, it's not just something that should be taken lightly or literally, but we should think about how is it impacting my life? How is it impacting the environment? How is it impacting others? How is it impacting the well-being of animals? Yeah. I hope that's not a very complicated introduction to the question.
No. What do you think of the current state of our food systems?
Right. Given that we are having this conversation right now in 2020, it couldn't have come at a better time. Yeah. Given that the reason, first of all, we're in a state of lockdown and upheaval throughout the world can directly go back to our relationship with food. Yeah, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. and everyone is worried about what's going to happen in the future. We are worried about what comes next, or there's a lot of uncertainty. But if you look at the real cause of why we are here, it goes back to our food systems. That may be radical, but I think right now it has been, it is a well-known fact that the cause or the start of the pandemic goes back to intense farming systems. In China, for example, in the sense that our food systems are broken, our food systems are inefficient, they are ineffective, they are outdated, and it is time we think holistically about what we want for the future. By that I mean we can no longer produce food, as though we are not intelligent people. I mean, humans are some of the most intelligent species in the world, but we are acting in ways that are in contradiction to that. Let me give you an example. Did you know that there are over 30,000 varieties of plants that we can grow in the world, but we only consume less than 150?
I didn't know that.
So when you think about why we consume only less than 150, it goes back to the fact that we have perfected the art of growing very few items, intensifying the growth and production of very few items, and also the growth and production of very few animals. Our food systems basically are broken. We need to fix it. We need to think holistically about if we want to sustain ourselves, if we want to sustain the ever-growing population, given that by 2050 it will not be as it is today. We have to give note to the fact that the size or the mass of the earth is not growing, but at the same time the population is growing exponentially. It's growing every day. So when you think about that, and when you think about the way we grow food and the way we interact with food, something is amiss somewhere. Like it's not adding up.
I actually had something on the radio on issues in Nyandarua.
Right.
The fact that, yes, Nyandarua is an area where we expect at least people to have enough food.
Right.
But the most surprising thing is that majority of the kids are facing malnutrition.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, is this the cause of monocultures?
Yeah, so now when you think about such instances, or even when you go back a few years, I think it was either in Nyandarua or just somewhere in Central as well, milk farmers were pouring out tons and tons of milk because there was nowhere to take it, there was no one to buy it, right? You remember this? So that now we have to ask ourselves, where is the disconnect? Why is it that the smallholder farmer, the person who wakes up to till his or her a small piece of land, maybe an eighth, maybe half an acre, maybe an acre, why is it that person cannot get the most value out of their production, right? So the reason we have to ask ourselves, does the mistake lie with the producer? Does it lie with the consumer? Does it lie with the aggregators? Does it lie with the government?
Or even the distribution?
Or even the distribution and the transportation. So that now the smallholder farmer, who is essentially the backbone of a food independent society, needs to get the most value out of their food, but they don't. If somebody is putting time, energy, and finances into the production, and not even at an expert level, but just at that, level of subsistence, farming, just to feed their own family. We have to ask ourselves why they're not getting value. Why, for instance, they go at a loss when they have so much input and not equivalent, and not the same amount, if not more, of the output.
I think it's high time we empower the farmers. Anyway,
it's important. It's important.
What do you think is the impact of our food and farming systems on our well-being and that of our planet?
Right. So as I started saying earlier, and I think this year is the best example of why we should really give thought to what we eat, the way it is grown, where it comes from, right? We can no longer be those kind of people who just, those people who are always aloof. You think that food comes from the supermarket, or you think that food comes from the fridge, or, we really need to be aware of where our food comes from. We need to be aware of what impact it has on our bodies, on our health. This year especially, because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and fine, we may talk about production of vaccines throughout the world, But this will not be the only pandemic. Others will come. And you know why others will come? Because if we continue with our current food production systems, eventually we'll have to contend with another pandemic. Yeah, but we cannot do that. We cannot sustain year-on-year lockdowns, or we cannot our bodies are not meant to, consume such, amounts of vaccines. Given that this year, the people, the experts, the so-called experts, are saying that we'll only be able to move around freely after we get a vaccine. Yeah. But now, what happens to the next one, and what happens after that, right? So we have to think about food, because food is the only way through which we get holistic health. Yeah, what we put in our body directly equals, how our lives are impacted. So whether we are to be healthy, whether we are to be sick, whether we are to live, food for all is not a privilege; it's a right. Like, we have to, as long as you're a living being in this world, you have a right to food, right? And what that means is that under the international law and under the Kenyan law, we must all have that, a basic provision of nutritious, abundant food, not just once in a while, but each and every day of our lives. And that is the only way we can, think about food, and that is the only way to look at food holistically.
Nic, you've mentioned on how our food systems are very complex, and it encompasses different activities involving the production, processing, transport, and consumption. The current one, as per what you've said, does not seem to do future generations or even us any justice.
Right.
How can our acts of cooking and eating take part in this conversation?
Yes, so when you think about food, we have to know that there are different processes involved from the time the seed is put into the ground and until you have the food in front of you on a plate, right? There are many people involved, many systems involved, and this essentially now, makes up for what we call the food system, right? In order for us to have a meaningful conversation, we have to look at where we have been, where we are, and what that could mean for the future, right? So that now it's high time we look at food and not just be, as I said earlier, those blind consumers. We can no longer just be those people who, for lack of a better word, consume food but don't know where it comes from, consume food but don't know how it is produced. I don't understand, for instance, why, Kenya, having been independent for so many years, for so many decades, we have to import food. We have to import things like sugar, maize, and all these things. Whereas we are perfectly capable of, producing our own food. There is nothing, there's no reason why a sovereign country like Kenya should not produce all the food that, the country needs, right? There's no reason why we should be importing fruits or oranges, mangoes from, say, Israel and whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas we are perfectly capable of
supporting our local
infrastructure, supporting our local farmers. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because food, for me, the way I define healthy food, the sum total of healthy food is when we think about the production, the transportation, the processing, and all these things. If we can minimize the number of processes involved for me to get that food, that is when I think that the food is healthy. For instance, let me give you an example. I should be able to wake up and buy my fresh fruits and vegetables from my local food vendor. I should be able to walk no more than 1 kilometer to find my local smallholder farmer, displaying his or her fruits and vegetables and produce, right? So that now when you minimize the number of processes, for instance, when you remove the aspect of transportation, you are now beginning to positively, because when you think about transportation, you're thinking about, gas emissions, you're thinking about
also the cost
that people have to go through. So that now when you remove that aspect completely, for instance, the transportation cost,
maybe to also add on, I think also safety. All safety does not count.
The safety also, because when you think about all these things, for instance, preservation of food is a whole aspect of food production as well, right? So that now the longer the food travels, the more now you need to think about food preservation, and that now involves chemicals and what have you. So we need to be active in the way we think about food and not passive, right? I should be able to wake up, walk no more than 1 kilometer, find somebody, selling their own produce, fresh produce, without having to go to a local supermarket to buy fruits and vegetables that have been imported. At the same time, our cooking styles we need to adjust our cooking styles, right? we need to think about the idea that good food does not need to be complicated. Yeah. For instance, right now in the age of social media, there are all kinds of creative channels online that show you, that give all kinds of, amazing content, and they kind of make it, glamorous, and, people doing things in like 5 minutes but when you think about what it takes to produce that short clip, it's a whole thing, right? Food should be simple to cook. It should be nutritious. It should be delicious. And at the same time, it need not take so many hours in the kitchen for you to come up with something that is abundant in nutritious elements, something that is delicious. We need to change. We need to start thinking actively about, what am I eating? How am I making it? How is it impacting my life?
Yeah.
How is it impacting
I think actually most people really don't think of the last two aspects you've mentioned.
Right. Yeah, because we are passive. We are passive humans when it comes to what we eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, totally agree with you on that. Every time we talk about that we all have a right to food, fair enough, and the government is responsible for ensuring that all Kenyans enjoy this basic right.
Right.
Do we as individuals have a responsibility also in this?
Of course we do. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. We cannot be those passive people. Yeah. And we cannot be dependent on, some kind of savior. You cannot have that savior mentality, someone to come from elsewhere to come and, tell us what to do or how to go about our lives, right? When we think about food, we have to think about ourselves. There are consumers. We as consumers, we as producers, we have to think about the producers. We have to think about the health aspect of things.
Yeah.
So that now there's no one person who holds who holds one magical key. There's no one person who has that, magical bullet that, the solution. The solution lies with all of us. Yeah. The solution lies at the end of the day with all of us, in the sense that the producers have a role to play. The people who add value have a role to play. The people who transport the food have a role to play. The government has a massive role to play in empowering its local food systems. And we finally, as the consumers, we have a major role to play, in the sense that we need to demand more of what is natural, what has been produced sustainably, instead of always relying on imported food items, or instead of always relying on heavily processed food items, right? So when you think about the entire value chain, or the entire food system, we each hold massive roles, and we cannot look at one person to provide the solutions for all these other elements in the mix. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned on how we can use our cooking skills in this conversation.
Right.
How should we incorporate indigenous foods that are ordinarily forgotten in modern recipes? And how do you advocate for consumption on indigenous foods, specifically among the youth? Because I believe majority of the youth have forgotten.
Yes. I think we may be an independent country, but our thinking might still be under colonial rule, in the sense that right now, if you walk into any random household, the staples in the house are the heavily processed, food items. These things. All the food items that we enjoy are not necessarily the healthiest, but they are readily available. They are, as compared to the healthier options. These food items are, they're cheaper. Yes, and all of a sudden, amidst all these things happening, we forget who we are as a people, right? We forget where we come from, because the story of food is a story of history. It is a story of culture. It is a story of our unique identities, right? So that now, if you go to Benin, the people in Benin should be able to provide you with their local fresh food, their local indigenous foods. You should not go to, or even you go to Makueni, you should be able to, to be provided with, the local delicacies there, right? But right now, if you go to any household, be it across the country or the continent or across the world, you find things that, as I said earlier, we have at least 30,000 varieties of plants. in the world that we can consume, but we've only perfected the art of consuming and producing less than 150 of those varieties, right? So we have to, that gives, begs the question why we are going wrong. Like, so what happens to the other thousands of options, right?
Yeah.
And I think the idea that, the idea that indigenous food is something from the past, or the idea that indigenous food is for people in the village.
Actually, people link it to poor people.
People link it to poor people, right? So that now you have to ask yourself, but our ancestors, our grandparents, going even back one generation, our parents and grandparents, they live long, abundant lives. Yeah, my granddad died at 94. These things. Whenever you could visit him and bring him all this, that box that you always take to your granddad or your grandma, he'd be like, that is nonsense. He wants to stick to what he knows, and it is, the things that you can literally walk into you can forage, you can walk into the forest, you can, grow your own, foods, you can see them, you can be able to identify them locally, yeah? So that now the distance between that place that you picked it from and your plate is the shortest distance ever. It is, because we don't understand plants as much as we should do. We don't understand the properties that these things also, add into our bodies, right? And the tragic part is that now the youth, because you mentioned the youth look at these things as, poor people food. They look at these things as foods that only sick people should be taking, when they're lying in bed or they're sick in hospital. And the way it is presented to us, the way indigenous food is presented to us is so it needs to change.
And how do you incorporate it to your work, per se?
Yeah, because, so for me, I enjoy, I will not say that every day I eat indigenous foods, but I enjoy yams, I enjoy potatoes as much as I can on my daily foods, on my daily interaction, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I enjoy being able to go to the supermarket and identify, a particular vegetable, and I know what properties it adds to my body, or what, minerals and antioxidants it adds to my body, right?
Yeah. But Nic, how about as a chef?
Yes.
Do you prepare foods to other people? You incorporate in
So when it comes to my own personal choices, as an individual and as a chef, my predominant food choices are plant-based. Yeah, and this is just for me, and not. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone. I'm just speaking on behalf of my own self.
Yeah.
I enjoy mostly 99% of the time. I enjoy plant-based foods, and I incorporate them every day in my food preparation. When it comes to enlightening people on how to eat, I encourage people to eat foods that are simple to make. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean that you should take the least amount of time in the kitchen, right? You need not be there for hours on end and then spend 30 minutes or 25 minutes eating. Food is, food is simple, and we should treat it simply as it is, but at the same time we should not take it lightly. That's the irony. It is simple, but it gives the most impact on our lives, right? So food, and especially indigenous foods, we should empower people to be their own unique selves, right? And this is what I try to do as well in my daily life, so that now at the end of the day, you don't have to eat things that seem fancy or seem popular. We should identify. We should be proud of who we are.
Yeah.
We should be proud of our heritage, and what that means should not. It should be incorporated in everything, including the way we eat. At the end of the day, I think it is important for us to decolonize our eating systems, decolonize the way we look at food and the way we interact with food. I want to be proud as a Luo, for instance, to be able to eat my unique foods from, and I want to be able to find them, locally and easily. So that now it doesn't have to be a case where when you look at the buffet, it's always, the things that these things that we all know. That any buffet really, when you go to different events or whatever, the foods that are always there are always the same.
as we finish, you have mentioned so much on the simple ways of cooking.
Right.
Can you just tell the listeners some of the basics of good cooking, and maybe one of your favorite recipes?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I don't want to be limited to one recipe.
Okay.
Yeah, like I enjoy a variety of different dishes, and I experiment with different dishes every now and again.
But you must have that favorite one.
And I'm trying to think about it, but I don't know. So I think I enjoy noodle-based dishes.
Okay.
I enjoy a lot of pasta. I enjoy stir-fry dishes a lot. At the end of the day, the way that I cook, the way that I look at food in the kitchen is I want to spend the shortest amount of time in the kitchen. But at the end of the day, I want food that is most abundant in nutrients. I want food that is delicious, and I want food that will energize me throughout the day, and I don't want to spend hours on end lagging my feet as the food is digested in my body.
Yeah.
I want the food to act within me, and to give me strength, to give me nourishment in the shortest time possible, and for me to be able to go about my my work easily. About my favorite dishes, I think at the end of the day, I enjoy stir fry a lot. I enjoy stir fry and noodle-based dishes. A lot of pasta. I think that is that you've cornered me to identify that favorite meal. But I don't want to say that I have that one meal to go to. I enjoy quite a variety. Yeah.
Sawa, asante sana, Chef Nic.
No, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and I hope we are able to do this again sometime.
Sawa.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to write to us on info@roottofood.org. Make sure you also subscribe on our SoundCloud account at Chakula Podcast. You can also subscribe on our Apple Podcast account at Chakula Podcast, rate and review as well. For more information, you can check out our website, www.roottofood.org. Until next time, thank you. Bye-bye.